your host, Chase Brown, joined as always by our deputy editor, Dan Hope, and 11 Warriors reporter, Andy Anders, who is dressed again in his Cincinnati Bengals gear. It's been a few weeks since he's done it, but I think he's excited about what his team can do with a little bit of Flacco mania against the Green Bay Packers this
Excited
afternoon.
is one word to describe it, Chase.
Excited is one word.
That's certainly a word that you could, I guess, use in that setting.
Well, the Browns have the Pittsburgh Steelers today, and it's been about 30 years, I think, since the Browns won a game in Pittsburgh. So we'll see how much both of our Ohio sports teams will give us a good Sunday afternoon. But it always seems to be the case, even if Ohio State's professional sports teams don't deliver, the Ohio State collegiate team based here in Columbus always seems to deliver, and they did again on Saturday. The top-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes beat number 17 Illinois 34-16. Dan and Andy were 11 Warriors boots on the ground as always for our road game. As I've asked you before, I guess I only asked you once after the Washington game. It seemed like the environment was pretty good at the start of the game in Champaign. It seemed like people were energized and ready for their team to kind of, I guess, outrun or outperform the performance they had against Indiana earlier in the year, that 63-10 loss, and they came out with some energy. What was the stadium environment like, Dan?
I got to give Illinois props. Memorial Stadium is my first time there. I had not been there because the only time they were going to play on a road there since I've been on the beat was in 2020 when I drove to Champaign and the game was canceled 15 minutes after I got there. So I had not been in the stadium. That's one of my favorite stadiums in the Big Ten. I really like it. Like I really like the way that I feel like they blended like the historical elements of a stadium. Like you've got like the brick columns and all that. You've got tons of homages to their legends like Red Grange and Dick Butkus all over the stadium. But it's also like you could tell they've renovated it a lot. It looks nice and modern while also combining those historical elements. So, we talk so much about the stadium, like with Washington, like I liked Illinois better than Washington, to be honest. And that's no shade toward Washington. I really liked the stadium out there. I would put it somewhere in my top 5 for Big Ten stadiums. And so I want to give Illinois credit for that. I think that's an underrated stadium based on my first trip there. And I think it was a good environment. You certainly, as the game wore on, you saw the student section get smaller and smaller as it started to become increasingly clear that Ohio State was going to win the game. But I think, Illinois fans, early on in the game showed up. I think it helped Illinois in contrast with Washington, that orange and red look a lot more similar than purple and red. And so you could see the scarlet in there, but it was kind of obscured by the orange. So you couldn't really get a good read on like how many Ohio State fans were there. Certainly a sizable contingent of Buckeye fans there, but you couldn't really like tell really. I would sort of assume not on TV. You couldn't really tell because orange and scarlet look similar. But I think, Ohio State fans, as always, show up. And, just like we heard after the Washington game, you heard Ryan Day, Julian saying, lots of coaches and players give props to the Buckeye fans who made the trip out to Champaign.
Yeah, and I think the last time Ohio State played in Illinois was 2015, and the weather for that game was a blizzard. I remember the lasting memory of that game, I think for most Ohio State fans, would be JT Barrett's long touchdown run where it seems like he's outrunning both Illinois defenders and an avalanche behind him. So to see that stadium with some fair weather, which is something as we've talked about as a staff, Ohio State's had a great string of weather to start this season for all of their games.
Perfect.
Ideal conditions. Yeah, and I'm kind of curious when there's going to be a game where it might be a little bit windy or a little bit rainy and stormy. It probably will happen given the Big Ten climate, but we'll see. But yes, it was certainly
the next 5 games would be a good time to break that in. I think if you're Ohio State, you'd love to keep the weather the way it is, but you'd also don't want that game at the end of November to be like the first time you play in bad weather. I think the next 5 weeks would be a good time. And we'll probably talk a little more later in the show about why the next 5 weeks would be a good time for maybe experiencing that variable at some point.
We certainly will. Before we start our conversation about the Buckeyes, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, for 11 Warriors Live, also for the 11 Warriors Dubcast. It's First Bank of Central Ohio. It's the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support our business and business owners of Central Ohio. It is locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. Let's start our conversation here. It seemed like the sentiment after this game, a 34-16 win for Ohio State against the number 17 team in the country, was that from the coaches and the players' perspective, Ohio State played well, but not well enough for the team to accomplish some of the goals that they want to accomplish down the road. Andy, is that kind of the assessment that you would have had from this performance from Ohio State? There was good things to take away from it, but certainly some things to work on.
Yeah, I think that would be where I stand with it. The look, and I'm going to say it was still a really good performance, right? When beating a top 10, not top 10, but top 20 team on the road by 3 scores, never something you should take for granted. Clearly, looking at what happened around the country yesterday and some of the chaos that unfolded, particularly in the Big Ten, but the defense, I think, found a new way to dominate, as I kind of wrote about last night. Of they didn't hold Illinois into single digits like they had every other team before. What they did do was create 3 turnovers that left Ohio State each time with 35 yards or less to go for a touchdown on offense, and they converted all 3 of those into touchdowns. So you get 21 points off of turnovers. Defense still they made another red zone stop, although the red zone streak of 9, it was 9 at the time, red zone trips from opposing offenses without allowing a single touchdown, did come to an end. It took a very creative play call on 4th and 1, 4th and goal at the 1 for Illinois, where you hand the ball off to your running back, and the running back pitches it to another guy who came across the field to the outside there. And that finally was enough to punch a ball in from 1 yard out against this Ohio State defense after so many teams had tried this year. It was so the defense again is playing at a generational level. It feels like was it there? It was probably it objectively their worst defensive performance of the year, and yet it was still dominant. Like you had some areas of the game where Illinois found success going up tempo, just little chunks. They put a couple drives together, but that was it. And you look at it, and there are 19 teams across college football that hold opponents to less than 16 points per game. And that is now the most points an opponent has scored against Ohio State. Like, it's crazy still to think about how beastly this defense is. Offensively, though, I think that's where you're looking at those areas of improvement that you mentioned. The running game still isn't there, not where they want it to be come November. 2.9 yards per carry in this game, and they were leaning heavier on the run game than the pass game, in part because of the short fields, but also I still feel like there's a reluctance to throw the ball on 1st down in certain situations that I don't quite understand, other than maybe they are just trying to really put in the work and develop the running game as much as they can for November, for when they need it, and trusting that this defense is just going to take over games like it is right now. And they're probably going to have that luxury the next 5 games they play. Maybe UCLA proves to be a stronger foe now that they've got some momentum off the Penn State and Michigan State wins that they have. But all that aside, there's definitely room to grow for the ground game offensively and special teams too. Like, the punting hasn't been where you want it to be, some areas like that. So yeah, I think that's a good assessment, Chase. It was a good win, a good performance, but areas to work on.
Dan, what would be your primary takeaway from this game? Whether that's, kind of adding to what Andy has already mentioned, or was there anything that you kind of came away from this game in particular thinking, okay, Ohio State did this well, but they certainly need to improve in this area if they're going to have success continually down the road the rest of this season?
Yeah, I mean, we hear Ryan Day always say, the issues are still there. And I think this is certainly one of those games where Ohio State can go back and say the issues are still there. I mean, offensively, like Andy said, the run game, there's still clearly some work to do there. Didn't help that Bo Jackson was nursing an ankle injury in this game, didn't play much in the second half. But certainly I think that run game is probably a big area that you look at. of an area where improvement needs to continue. Like Andy said, in the bigger games this year, Texas, Washington, Illinois, we really haven't seen Ohio State open it up through the air. And kind of like I hinted at earlier, there's not really a big game left on the schedule now until November 30. So we'll see over these next 5 games, can Ohio State really get into that consistent rhythm to where when you go into, you've got an interesting kind of setup here where you've got a 5-game stretch coming up where it's all opponents Ohio State should beat comfortably. If Ohio State doesn't win any of these next 5 games comfortably, and yes, that certainly includes Penn State, then something went wrong. After that, then you have the Michigan game and postseason. So it's like you kind of got like, okay, the next 5 weeks are kind of your stretch to work through whatever issues you might have. And then it's championship season. Then it's like, okay, all our goals are on the line. We got to play our best football. So I think, the good news for Ohio State is like they don't need to be a perfect final form of themselves right now because they've got 5 weeks to work on everything. But I think, yeah, I mean, the offense definitely has room to grow. Like Andy said, I mean, you just look at the points scored. It was the defense's worst game of the season, but still not a bad game by any stretch because, I mean, Ohio State scored more points off turnovers than Indiana scored, period. So it was still a winning game for the defense. Even still, 6 games into the season, the defense has still allowed fewer points than Jim Knowles' defense allowed versus UCLA. So still great things for the defense. Special teams remains an issue of consternation. I think particularly the punting game. Joe McGuire, frankly, has not had a good season. And so I think that's still an area you kind of wonder, like, do they need to make some changes there? Are we going to see some improvement in that area in the second half of the season? But in the end, Ohio State went on the road and covered the spread against a ranked opponent. And I think it's easy when the game's going on to get caught up in like, why didn't they do this? Why isn't this thing working as well as it did? Then you watch the rest of the day. You watch Penn State lose its 3rd game in a row. You watch Michigan lose to USC. You watch Oregon lose to Indiana. It's like, and Ohio State went on the road and beat a ranked opponent by 18 points. So it's like the standard is so high, the expectation's so high that there tends to be a lot of nitpicking about what could Ohio State do better. And yes, if you see certain issues, I kind of viewed yesterday's game is kind of a closest litmus test we were going to have until the Michigan game because of the fact that the rest of the schedule until that Michigan game is not strong. And it was a road test game against a ranked opponent. So I think there's certainly things you can see from that game and say, we need to do these things better if we're going to beat Michigan. We need to do these things better if we're going to make another college football playoff run. But you look around what happened to the rest of the Big Ten yesterday, and I think if you're Ohio State, you should be very, very happy that you beat a team on the road by 18 points and that you kept the Illibuck in Columbus.
Yeah, and this is something that Jason Priestis, our boss and 11 Warriors founder, says pretty frequently when we're talking about Ohio State's games is, the other team wants to win too. When they're playing in a game, it's not their job, their role, their responsibility, their desire is not to just lay down and let Ohio State walk all over them. And Brett Bielema had no intention of going into Saturday's game losing. He wanted to win. He very clearly wanted to win the game. And when you look at Illinois' schedule, sure, they don't really have a great marquee standout statement win, but their 2 losses are to 2 of the best teams in the country. It's Ohio State and it's Indiana. And
maybe the 2 best.
Maybe the 2 best. And if Illinois didn't lose to Indiana in the fashion in which it lost, 63-10, this team came into the season ranked around the top 10 in the country. They probably would still be in that high teen range if it wasn't such a blowout loss that they suffered to Indiana. So it's not like this Illinois team is some pushover team that Ohio State could have come in and just bulldozed. It was a team that had high expectations coming into this season and can still deliver on those expectations in a lot of ways. They beat USC, who, again, we keep teasing this Big Ten schedule was incredible on Saturday. It really was. But USC comes and gets a great win against Michigan on Saturday. this Illinois team is not one that I think when we look back on their season is going to be one where they wasted many opportunities, that they lost many games that they weren't supposed to lose. And I think that that's kind of the mindset that Ryan Day had after the game. I want to get your thoughts on this comment because somebody asked him kind of about Ohio State's energy and its poise from the opening kickoff until probably about the middle of the fourth quarter is the way that he was describing it. But he said, this is a quote, "I thought we did come in with good energy. I liked the way we played early, quite honestly. Was it all perfect? No, but they're a good team. That's kind of how it goes. We all expect perfection, including me. I thought we played well in there toward the end of the third, into the fourth, and then we took our foot off the pedal a little bit and lost our focus. But it's a good sign when you go into the locker room after a win like this and make sure everybody understands what a great win it was, because I think we all felt like we left a little bit on the field." So it's a little bit of the same discussion we just had, but when you look at the expectations that we should have for this team moving forward, Andy, they have a decent road here against 5 opponents that they should win comfortably, but then they're going to have a game that's always going to be a test against Michigan at the end of the year. What should we be expecting from Ohio State in these next 5 weeks leading up to the Michigan game? Do we want to see a well-oiled machine that's going to be bulldozing its opponents, or do we need to see this Ohio State team kind of work out some of those kinks still to finally reach its full form against its most important opponent of the year?
Well, to quote a certain taco shell commercial, "Porque no los dos." I mean, the I think yes, they're going to bulldoze through Wisconsin. Wisconsin might be the worst team in the Big Ten this year, objectively. Like they're if you were power ranking teams or something, Penn State might be at the bottom of that because of how this recent stretch has gone. But not to spoil anything for Dan's one of Dan's signature pieces there, but the Wisconsin is really bad. You have Purdue, who's really bad. You have Penn State, who's really bad. These are teams that they should run through
I just want to
on
interrupt
paper.
one sec to just pose this question. What would you guys have thought if I told you 2 weeks ago that the best team Ohio State would play between now and Michigan is UCLA?
It might be accurate.
I would have
Jerry,
called you crazy.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, they've beaten Penn State. I mean, Wisconsin, as Andy said, is an absolute dumpster fire right now. And Purdue and Rutgers are Purdue and Rutgers. I mean, they're both 0-3. They're both the bad teams they usually are. So I can't believe I'm saying that, because 2 weeks ago I thought UCLA was destined to be the worst team in the Big Ten all year long. But I think the best team Ohio State is going to play in its next 5 games is UCLA.
It's crazy.
Yes.
It's crazy,
It
but
is.
it feels
wild,
true.
the turn of events in the Big Ten in the last few weeks. But to get back to I think because you're playing teams that Ryan Day is going to come out and say publicly that we're going to dominate this team, but he is going to say it's about us, right? That's his go-to quote for these kinds of games. Not looking at the
And
record,
the other
not
team
looking
is
at
well
that.
coached.
Yes,
The other
well
team's well
coached. That's the
coached.
other tell. But because you know you can beat up on these guys, I think you do continue to work through some of the kinks in the running game. Work on getting that established, getting the ground game going with some confidence, while still opening the valves up and attacking downfield a little more. Like we might not see, we'll probably still see a balance. I think like relatively equal amounts of runs and passes in these games, but like when they throw the ball, more aggressive with it, pushing it downfield more often, kind of a thing. It's kind of where I land on it. So I expect them to bulldoze through these 5 opponents, even UCLA, since that's now the toughest team they play before Michigan. But I do expect them to still want to improve on the things they need to improve on in terms of especially the running game on offense.
Got a lot of questions actually to get to toward the end of this show. So let's move quickly into the thing that we've teased quite a bit on this episode, and that would be the Big Ten whip around. We've had this segment in our show for the past 2 weeks, and it's been pretty fun because the Big Ten has delivered some pretty incredible results over the past couple of weeks. I want to start with this one. We don't really have to address it in too much depth, but Washington beat Rutgers on Friday night. Washington scored 38 points to Rutgers 19. Damon Williams Jr., guys, he is legit. And the way that we now can look at how Ohio State contained Damon Williams Jr. a couple of weeks ago, it adds to how impressive it was when you see him throw for 402 yards and 2 scores, and then rush for 136 yards and 2 scores in that game against Rutgers. Washington's 5-1. They have the same record as Oregon. Uh, that's pretty wild. I would imagine we don't know what the AP poll is going to be this week, but Washington deserves to be ranked. Would you say that, Dan? I think they at least deserve to be in the top 25.
Yeah, I say absolutely. You look at yeah, they haven't really beaten anybody yet, and that's the thing that's hurting them in the rankings. But their only losses to Ohio State. So I think the next 2 weeks are going to be very telling for Washington because they play on the road at Michigan next week, and then they host Illinois. Like the next 2 weeks is when we're going to find out if Washington's a college football playoff contender. It's like if they can win those games, like they're going to go into November, they're going to be highly ranked, and they're going to be right in the thick of it. They lose those 2 games, then they fall out of it. So like we're really going to find out how for real Washington is these next 2 weeks, because then they go Wisconsin, Purdue, UCLA, and then potentially a huge game at the end of the year against Oregon. But as you said, Damon Williams Jr., I said it before the season, I picked him to be the all Big Ten quarterback. I'd probably pick Julian Sain to be that right now, but Damon Williams Jr. performances like he had on Friday night against Rutgers. He had 538 total yards of offense. Performances like that will keep him in the running for all Big Ten honors. So I think Damon Williams Jr. is a stud. Again, they're a weird team just because they played a very soft non-conference schedule. They had to come back from a 20-0 deficit to beat Maryland. They had to come back from a deficit again to beat Rutgers. So it's like they're one of those teams that I really like. I'm still like, I don't know what they are. I don't know how good they are. But like right now, like they're 5-1. Like they belong in that conversation among Big Ten contenders.
Let's go to the next game on the list here. Indiana beats Oregon in Autzen. Number 7, Indiana 30. Number 3, Oregon 20. There weren't necessarily there wasn't a standout performance to me in this game from either of the two quarterbacks that were going into this thing, kind of the leading front runners as Heisman contenders. Fernando Mendoza completes 20 of 31 passes for 215 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Dante Moore, he had 21 of 34 completions, 186 for a touchdown and 2 picks. Indiana's standout performers were definitely Roman Hemby, 19 carries, 70 yards, 2 scores, and then Elijah Surratt continues to impress out of that Indiana receiving core with 8 catches, 121 yards, and 1 score. There were 2 streaks that ended in this game, Andy. There was one, Oregon's 18-game home win streak at Autzen, which included a win over Ohio State last season. And then also Indiana was 0-46. I believe they're 0-46 against top 5 opponents on the road. And so they break that streak as well. You look at this Indiana team, Andy, we talked about them a couple weeks ago. Could they be the 3rd team in the Big Ten? Now they've established themselves as at least top 2. You can make the argument, given their resume, that they deserve to be the number 1 team in terms of power rankings in the Big Ten. What say you about the Indiana Hoosiers, Andy?
Yeah, it's hard. For me, like putting power rankings aside for a second, because I want to talk about like a couple of things as it pertains to Indiana. This was a program defining win for them. Like,
absolutely,
there was this feeling with Curt Cignetti. We all acknowledged how great a coach he was last year, rolling into this year, getting off to another great start, dominating Illinois, etc. But there was always this question of, can you really get over the threshold at Indiana, right? You can rise to the top of the 2nd tier of the Big Ten, that next group of teams that kind of comes after Ohio State, Oregon, some years Michigan, not this year, some years Penn State, not this year, in the Big Ten, right? Like those brands that have been at the top since they got here in the case of Oregon, or have consistently been powers like the other 3. And this win put them there. Like they got over that threshold because that was, I mean, for me, that was the last question remaining about Kurt Cignetti's Indiana is, yeah, you made the playoffs, had a fantastic year, did all these things, but can you actually compete with the big boys of the Big Ten? And they went on the road to one of the toughest places to play in college football against a team that, we all viewed as a national title contender, might still view them as a national title contender. And not just one, but they were the better team. Like they threw a pick six in this game and won by 2 possessions. That's um, outstanding performance. The defense is legit. As much as people want to talk about Mendoza and the passing game, like this Indiana defense is really good now. This you can't talk enough about how good Kurt Cignetти is at this, and just the fact that Indiana has arrived. When you compare them to Ohio State, it kind of depends on how you power rank teams, how you rank teams. If you're doing it on resume, I don't think there's a team with a better resume in college football right now than Indiana has. This win at Oregon is probably the best win any team has. Like that's, being considered for the top 3 in the AP poll or what have you. And the dominance they showed against Illinois, who, like Dan said, I'd agree, is a quality football team. They showed they were a quality football team yesterday, I think, and showed real fight against Ohio State. And Luke Altmaier is a great quarterback. They, to me, like on resume, if it were purely based on that for me, I would put Indiana number 1. But I still like, if I were power ranking teams, if I were ranking teams, I still go on Ohio State to me. I'm not knocking what Indiana has on its roster. They've got some really talented, really good dudes, clearly. But to me, I think Ohio State's still a more complete team in terms of the roster that's assembled, the talent that's there. Um, it's the defense is generational to me. They still have the 2 best receivers in college football. When they decide, and I still think it's a win, when they decide to lean heavier on the passing game and attack with what's really their strength, I think they are the best team in college football right now, just from that perspective to me. So it's very close, but I would still personally power rank Ohio State ahead of Indiana for those reasons.
Joel Klatt had the best comparison, I think, for Ohio State and the way that they've performed this season. I'm curious if he'll bring back the same take after watching them closely, being in person for the game on Saturday against Illinois. But up until that game, he had compared them to Usain Bolt running the 100-meter sprint, and how you watch Usain Bolt glide across the track. And it looks like everyone around them is pushing their body to the brink to run as fast as they are for that brief sprint. But Usain Bolt has a smile on his face and is almost laughing as he crosses the finish line, because for a moment and for a long time, he was and is the fastest person on the planet. And it seems like that's how Ohio State has performed in some respects this season, because their defense is so talented. They can continue to lean on that defense. The offense can, as they continue to unlock more of the offense and put more on Julian Sands' plate. So I tend to agree with your take, Andy, though I do see that the resume for Indiana is certainly undeniable in a similar way to Miami with the wins that they've had this season, though Florida State, that win over Florida State, continues to look worse and worse each week as they've now suffered their 3rd loss. You know who else has suffered their 3rd loss? Penn State. Penn State lost at home to Northwestern, and that is not hyperbole. That's not a lie. It is fully true that Northwestern beat Penn State at Beaver Stadium 22-21 on Saturday. Dan, I don't even know what question to ask you, because I saw this final score on Saturday and was honestly shocked that this Penn State team that came into the season with national championship expectations, with expectations to see Drew Aller take a step forward, to lean on a run game that includes Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, to have a receiving core that has improved mightily, and a defense that is always good and has Jim Knowles as its defensive coordinator. They've now lost 3 games in a row. So what do we make of this Penn State team and the collapse that they've experienced over the past 3 weeks?
I mean, the season's over. I mean, it is. Like, I mean, they could win out and they're not going to make the college football playoff. I highly doubt they're going to win out. They might lose out. I mean, I right now, I'd say I don't think Penn State even makes a bowl game the way they're playing right now. I mean, last week's loss was bad. This is even worse. At home,
to Northwestern.
It's like clearly they did not respond the way they needed to respond to the loss to Oregon. And it's like, okay, they let one loss become two. And you're thinking like, all right, like they got to wake up now, right? Like you would think like they're going to come in, they're going to play pissed off. Like they're clearly on paper a better team than Northwestern. They're going to handle business right. Nope. They let two losses become three and they lose again. Making matters even worse, Drew Aller gets hurt late in the game. He's now out for the season. And so this is a team, they've lost 3 straight games. They've lost their starting quarterback. At this point, I think it has to be only a matter of time before they have a new head coach. I mean, I know the buyout on James Franklin is massive, but at this point, I do not think there is a path forward for James Franklin at Penn State. I mean, I think basically the entire fan base wants him gone. I think donors want him gone because this is going to be, I think, one of the most disappointing seasons we've ever seen from a team in college football history with what's happened to this team. I admit it. I picked Penn State to win the national championship. Like it seemed like they were following that Michigan, Ohio State blueprint. And they are at the midpoint of a season. Penn State still has not beaten a Power 4 team this year. It has just been an absolute disaster of a season for Penn State. And like you said, it's like, where do they go from here? Where can they go? Like it's just a really, really, really bad 3 weeks. And it's crazy because you think about how quickly things can change. They had a lead on Oregon in overtime. If they win that game, they are going to be ranked top 2 in the country. And most likely the last 2 weeks don't happen. They could be 6-0, and we would be talking about how excited we are for that big Ohio State Penn State matchup in a few weeks. And it's like, I was talking about this with Andy last night. Like it should make you kind of take a step back and appreciate what Ohio State has done since that Michigan loss last year, because that could have gone like this. Like Ohio State loses to Michigan. People are calling it the worst loss in Ohio State history. They could have gone laid an egg against Tennessee, lose the season opener this year against Texas, and everyone would be talking about Ryan Day the way that James Franklin's being talked about right now. Like that could have happened. There were 2 ways that could have gone. And Ohio State instead turned everything around completely, and they haven't lost a game since. Penn State, they found themselves at that fork in the road of, okay, you just suffered a tough loss. How do you respond? And they've just gone the path of just completely falling off a cliff. So, I think, it makes me appreciate what Ohio State was able to do after that devastating loss last season, because this team, it's like they suffered one bad loss and they just let it completely fall apart.
Yeah, I shared it with our staff in Slack yesterday on Saturday, and at the time it was a half-baked take, and now I've put it in the oven. I've let it bake. It's ready, and I think just what you mentioned, Dan, is what it is. That, I mean, say what you want about Jim Harbaugh. I know he's not a popular person on our message boards and on our website, but his players loved him. And when Michigan ran it back with a bunch of seniors in 2023 that were hungry to win a national championship, there was nothing that could stand against them. And I think Ohio State tried to follow a similar formula. They successfully followed that formula by bringing a bunch of guys back hungry to win a national championship. And when their backs were pressed against the wall, not once, but twice, against Oregon when they lose in Autzen, and then even more so, even worse, when they lose to Michigan for the 4th straight time, you have to credit Ryan Day for how he was able to bring the best out of his players in 4 consecutive wins against Tennessee, Oregon, the team that beat them earlier in the year, Texas and Notre Dame en route to a national championship. And it seemed like Penn State was going to be the next iteration of the teams that bring back veteran leadership, experienced players. But I believe the secret sauce, the secret formula, the secret ingredient to the recipe that gets you that national championship is to have a leader out front that the players would go to war for, that the players would gladly die for in a battle. And I don't think that James Franklin has shown me throughout his tenure that he's that kind of coach. And I know that I'm not in the locker room. I know that I'm not in the program, but I'm even thinking, as you're talking about, Dan, some of the fights that he's picked with fans in the stands that heckle him, or some of the comments that he's made in press conferences talking about where his team needs to get before it can become elite. And it just doesn't seem like he had that kind of leadership that once his players had a breaking point or a fork in the road, that they were going to buy into the culture that he's created and were going to buy what he was selling. And it seems like this Penn State team, you might not be wrong in the sense that they could see this season continue to spiral downward. At best, I think they're 7-5 at the end of this season. They play at Ohio State, they play Indiana the following week. I
And they
don't
play
see them
at
winning either
Penix
of
this
those two
week.
games.
They play
They
at
do.
Penix. So they have a stretch of at Iowa, at Ohio State, Indiana. They could easily be 3-6.
Yeah. And that's a national championship caliber team that at least we thought going into the year that has now seen its season eviscerate, go away completely. And it is just shocking each week that we continue to see them perform under the expectations that they had going into the year. Andy, I want to ask you now about Michigan and USC. USC and Michigan, the coaches actually had a little bit of beef back and forth going into this game where Sharon Moore had some comments saying, the Coliseum's only going to be sold out because Michigan's coming. Lincoln Riley said, I don't care what Sharon Moore says. We're really looking forward to playing. And then Lincoln Riley was the one who put his money where his mouth was, because USC comes out and wins 31-13 in a game that, kind of to me established that USC can hang with the Big Ten brands and the Big Ten teams, because they've always been talented, but when it comes to toughness and playing against the Big Ten teams that want to run downhill and want to establish good defense, this was a win for USC that really impressed me. Is that how you view this win for the Trojans?
Yeah, I do. They turned the ball over a couple times in the red zone. The score wasn't that close, but shouldn't have even been as close as it was. Um, wasn't a game that I got the chance to watch. Just kind of followed around along with our 11 Warrior Slack and checking in on the score as I was driving or as Dan was driving part of the game, and then I was driving the rest of the game. Then I got the final score from Dan, and then so it was a weird game to follow because of how the travel schedule was for us. But um, you know, just being a box score watcher, right? It was clear that USC kind of dominated the game. I feel like Michigan's offense right now is kind of Justice Haynes save us. They haven't looked great the games I've gotten to see on the offensive line. Bryce Underwood has looked like a freshman. I still think he'll probably be a good quarterback at some point, but he's certainly not the greatest freshman of all time, as Dave Portnoy would say, uh, or had said before the season at least. So the to me, you asked more about USC. Of course, though, this is an Ohio State show, so we have to talk about the Michigan perspective of it. USC
Of course.
wise, yes, I think they are starting to find a little bit of something in terms of like competing in that second tier of the Big Ten. Now, it's weird to say that as the standard for USC because, like, I still remember my childhood when USC was a perennial national title contender, right? Especially under Pete Carroll. Uh, and what they've come to now under Lincoln Riley is just trying to find the footing of being a good second tier Big Ten team. So, they already have the loss to Illinois, right? This was a good step forward for them, though. This was kind of a game that they needed. Like, you handle business against a team that a Big Ten team that a lot of people would consider top 25 caliber. We'll see how that plays out the rest of the season for Michigan, but Yeah, great win for USC's program, probably just trying to find that footing and getting to the echelon that they expected when they hired Lincoln Riley.
You brought up Justice Haynes. He actually left the game yesterday with an injury. Jordan Marshall was the one that led Michigan in carries. He had 14 for 68. Justice Haynes only had 10 for 51. Sharon Moore said after the game that Haynes will be okay. That he felt that Haynes could have probably gone back out, but they wanted to be extra cautious. He called Haynes a student athlete. Well, I don't know if we're necessarily considering our athletes student athletes anymore, but that is still, I guess, the technical term. But anything that happens to them, he says, we're going to make sure that they're okay. But as you mentioned, Danny, it felt like the game was pretty much in USC's control from start to finish. So they're going to protect the guy that they want to save their offense moving forward. Bryce Underwood went 15 to 24 for 207, 2 scores and a pick in this game. Jaden Davis also was out there for 2 pass attempts. He threw an interception. But does this, Dan, in your mind, establish USC firmly in the top 5 of Big Ten teams? Would you maybe put them in the 4 or 5 ranking right there around with Washington?
Yeah, I'd have to put them fourth. I'd put them fourth right now. I would put Washington fifth, and I put USC above Washington because they have a better win now. They beat a Michigan team that was ranked going into that game. Washington has not beaten anyone of that caliber yet. So for me, I have USC at 4, and I have Washington at 5 in those Big Ten rankings. And like you said, I mean USC just put itself right back in that college football playoff conversation. Now they've got to back it up, but you look at what they've done now. They do have that road loss at Illinois, but Illinois not a bad team. Another huge game coming up for USC this week, which really could be, you could really look at it as a college football playoff eliminator game. USC at Notre Dame. Notre Dame with 2 losses already. They've got to win that one to keep themselves in the CFP race. USC, maybe not completely out of it if they lose at Notre Dame, but they would have to go get a road win at Oregon later in the season. So that's going to be a big game for both of those teams. And I think if USC can win that game on the road at Notre Dame, then we have to firmly talk about them as a college football playoff contender. But I think right now going into that game, there's a clear top 2, whichever order you want to do it, Indiana, Ohio State, or Ohio State, Indiana. They're the clear top 2 now. Oregon is still firmly in that free spot. Although I do think you can look at Oregon and say, well, I mean, their best win was against a Penn State team that's completely gone off the rails, and now they lost to Indiana. So Oregon's got something to prove now, but they're still very clearly the number 3 team in my eyes. And then you've got, USC, Washington, Michigan, I kind of put, I probably kind of put Michigan in that 6th spot still because they do have the win over Nebraska. Nebraska not doing bad. They're 5-1 now. Cincy's now a ranked team. So Nebraska's in that conversation right now as well. But with Michigan having a win over Nebraska at Nebraska, that keeps Michigan there to me 6 with Nebraska 7. And then, I put Illinois in that 8th spot because they do have 2 losses, but like you said, it's to the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, maybe the 2 best teams in the entire country. So, you got Illinois there. I mean, Iowa with a big dominant win over a very bad Wisconsin team yesterday. I think they kind of round out that top half of a Big Ten with Maryland now slipping into the bottom half as October has come for Maryland, and their 4-0 start has now turned into 4-2.
Yeah. Dan mentioned that Cincinnati is in the top 25 of the coaches poll. Just to give you those numbers before we go to our fan questions, Ohio State is still number 1 in the coaches poll. Indiana's up to number 3, while Oregon falls down to number 9. USC entered the top 25 at 21, while Illinois is hanging on at 25. Michigan dropped out of the top 25, and Washington is not featured in that top 25 of the coaches poll. The AP poll will probably be out here in about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half. But let's go to some of our poll questions, our fan questions. Had one, Andy, I think that you could maybe speak into a little bit with your football schematics expertise. There's one from the forum that says, it seems as though any team that plays Ohio State's offense in a too high safety shell often defeats our big play ability. much like Michigan the last couple of years, Washington and Illinois this year. Is this just the blueprint to beat Ohio State under Ryan Day? What can we do to defeat this look?
That's a good question. I do think a lot of that too high safety stuff. Yes, it's that's what it's built for. Like you run that too high safety shell a lot of times when you are specifically trying to limit the big plays that an offense can create, and so um, you basically have to earn it, right? You have to find, there's too high man, there's too high zone. When I think a lot of the zone, you just got to run zone beaters. You got to like, it's football schematic stuff that's like been around for a while, and it's a willingness I think too to lean into your strengths while still addressing what the defense is doing to you. Ryan Hartline, first year calling plays, I think he would say that he's still learning on the job. There's still room to grow for him in knowing how to attack some of those looks. Because not every team is going to do what Minnesota was willing to do and line up in man and let your ace receivers beat them on the outside, right? Like these too high looks are probably what Ohio State's going to see a lot of because of Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. So you have to have you have a list of plays that can beat those coverage looks or at least pick up chunk gains, right? It's not going to be the most explosive offense all the time. Um, but at the same time, there are shots that are sometimes there against a too high shell, depending on how a team plays it. It's all about in-game adjustments to me. It's what Matt Patricia has been so good at. And I feel like sometimes Ohio State has kind of hit its head against a wall, like when it's had these walls offensively of wanting to do a certain thing running the ball. And especially like they haven't been particularly creative in the run game, it feels like at certain stretches. A lot of just like stuff going up the middle and not mixing and meshing different runs. Um, it's a you have to be willing to draw up those things and lean on the passing game, even when a team is in a too high shell. There are ways to attack that. It might not be a 50-yard bomb, but you have spot routes. You have you have a variety of ways to get after zone looks and too high shells. And I really think that just simply this year, the Ohio State offense is more efficient passing the ball than it is running the ball, and I don't think that's going to change. And I think even their offensive lines have been better pass protecting than they have run blocking. Like everything to me, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to stay balanced in terms of the play calls, run versus pass. But to me, when the bigger games come down the road, and you're no longer in this first half of the season mode of just getting everyone's feet underneath them. I think the offense needs to pivot to a heavier lean on the passing game, or even just like kind of playing it in reverse where you're throwing it on first down a significant portion to set up the running game later. Like spread the defense out a little bit first, you know. Um,
And I think just to
so
add on to that, I think when we talk about that November 30 and on portion of the season, I think, like you said, some of it might be working through the kinks now, trying to figure out what works. You get to that November 30 and on portion of the season, there comes a point where Ohio State needs to just say, we have Jeremiah Smith, we have Carnell Tate, we have Julian saying, you don't play us however you want. We are going to do what we do best. I think there's maybe a little bit too much willingness dating back to that Michigan game last year of letting the defense dictate how you play offense. And I think that's something when you get to those bigger games. I don't think the CFP, they didn't do that. So I think they've shown like, they can really turn it up. But I think like you get into those bigger games, you can't let the defensive scheme dictate the way you play on offense. You have too much talent on offense to just say, well, they want us to run it, so we're going to run it. Like you got at some point you got to say, we got Jeremiah Smith, we got Carnell Tate. Find a way to stop us.
Yeah. I think that there was a few times after the game on Saturday where reporters asked Julian Sand kind of about how Illinois' defense was playing Ohio State's offense, and he said, you have to take what the defense gives you. And I think that's kind of almost like a point guard approach to the offense is you're going to make the pass that needs to be made to lead to some success. The issue is the difference between basketball and football is that you have one possession to get the ball in the hoop in basketball. You have 3 plays to get a first down on defense. And so if the defense is giving you these check downs, these short routes, these short runs, you're not moving the chains at the same rate as if you have a 10 to 15 yard pass to Jeremiah Smith across those sticks that keeps those moving. I know that that's not always something that's going to be available for Ohio State's offense, but I think to your point, Dan, when you have the weapons that Ohio State has in the passing attack, I do think that when they get to these matchup games further down the road, that it would be in their best interest to unlock the offense to allow for those guys to take over in ways that maybe they haven't quite yet this season on a consistent basis. We've seen it against Minnesota. We've seen it against, Grambling. We've seen it in those opportunities in those games. But when the opponents come further down the schedule, it might be a different story for what Ohio State needs to accomplish to move the football. To ask you this question, Dan, it's from Action Stanley Jackson. No way to tell if this is the former Ohio State quarterback. Who knows? He asks, is this really the best punter Ohio State has? 38 yards with 0 wind, no touch when needed. What's the solution for Ohio State to get more out of its punting game? And then there was a further reply that said Ohio State's punt return game left a lot to be desired as well. So it seems like Ohio State special teams, certainly of all the areas that they need to work on and improve, special teams is at the top of the list when it comes to the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think punting in particular, like it feels like dating back to the start of last season. I mean, you think back to the week of the first game last season, Ryan Day named Nick McLarty the starting punter, and then Joe McGuire ended up being the punter in that first game. He's been the punter ever since. I think there's been this desire, honestly, from Ohio State dating back to the start of last season for Nick McLarty to become a guy that they feel they can count on. And for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. I think that he has a bigger leg than Joe McGuire, but I think inconsistency has been a problem for him. And I just don't think that they necessarily trust him in a game situation right now. I think, unfortunately, to me, like I thought Joe McGuire was solid last year, like not spectacular, but solid. Did his job. There weren't a lot of like bad punts. It was just like a lot of okay punts. Whereas I feel like this year, it does feel like he's taken a step back. And so, I think this year, it's like the question is like, can McLarty push him? Like, can McLarty show enough consistency in practice? We talk about the next 5 weeks. Maybe the next 5 weeks is a good time to work Nick McLarty in there, even if it's just like alternating. Next 5 weeks might be a good time to give him some reps because these are teams you're supposed to beat. Maybe give him some game reps and see what he can do. I would like to see that. I think a lot of Ohio State fans would see that. If that doesn't happen, then Ohio State's going to have to look to bring in a new punter next year because, I think they're not getting what they should be getting at an Ohio State level out of that position right now. And honestly, it makes me wonder a little bit, should they be, there's a lot of great punters from Australia, but I think there's maybe almost a little bit too much of like all the good punters come from Australia. Like Cameron Johnston was great at Ohio State. Jesse Mirko was good. Now they have 2 Australian punters and they're not really getting what they should be out of that position. Is it time for Ohio State to maybe look more at local punters, punters across America, or it could just be getting a guy out of a transfer portal? I think those are going to be questions more obviously for after the season to ask. But, for right now, if it's even close, I would like to see Nick McLarty get some game reps just to see what he can do and see if he's a guy who can give you more at that position than what you're getting right now.
Andy, a question for you about our red zone. Says Ohio State's red zone seemed to have more problems against Illinois. Are you worried about Ohio State's red zone package? I will add to this just with some statistics for our audience that Ohio State's red zone defense is the best in the country. They've allowed 2 touchdowns and 4 field goals with opponents making 11 trips to the red zone. Ohio State's offense has made 31 trips to the red zone with 28 scores. 22 of them have been touchdowns and 6 of them were field goals. But it seems like that's probably the number one area that Ohio State's offense wants to improve as the season continues, is once they get inside that 20-yard line, that there seems to be a couple of issues that they might be running into. What do you see as those issues, Andy, and what are the ways that Ohio State can improve them moving forward?
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it's the running game. I like you have to be able to run the ball consistently to have effective road zone offense. Like that's kind of the whole baseline of it. When the field condenses, it gets harder to throw the ball because defensive backs have less ground to cover. That's the whole thing. You can afford to play heavier boxes too, which also makes it tougher to run. But you have to be able to get downhill and get some good gains and power forward. CJ Donaldson did what he needed to do in this last game as a power back. He converted, a couple nice touchdowns. It still feels like there's another gear he needs to find just in terms of getting a couple more dirty yards where he can fall forward, maybe run some guys over, move some piles. Um, but also like some of the run blocking when I don't know what it is, man. Whenever James Peoples was in this game, it felt like it was a jailbreak up front. I don't know how, like, if it was bad luck on his part, if for some reason the offensive line isn't, stepping up as much when he's in the game, but it just felt like he was getting swarmed in the backfield whenever he got the ball. I'm not even. It was hard to even evaluate James Peoples in this game for that reason. So um, I think that's where it starts. You have to find consistency on the ground, and so if you can't, then you've got to rely more on some of the red zone passing stuff that has worked for Ohio State in the past. Obviously, they had a good touchdown throw to Jeremiah Smith in this game.
It was a nice
That's
play.
part of the answer, but you can't expect them to just leave Jeremiah Smith open on what was almost a fade route there consistently. But where's the comeback routes we used to see that was such a staple of the Ryan Day offense near the goal line, man? Like, how many times did we see C.J. Stroud to Marvin Harrison on a comeback in the end zone? How many times did we see Justin Fields to Chris Olave on a comeback in the end zone? Like that's a play to me, the type of play that's been missing where Ohio State can rely on its receivers more. And we've seen some of it work this season. Jeremiah had that out route touchdown catch against Minnesota that looked pretty nice. I think again, it's the same for what like my entire thing the offense needs to improve on is. They need more consistency on the ground and to just lean more on the pass in general, I think, where you have two receivers who are incredibly capable of making great plays in the red zone when you need to finish drives for touchdowns. It's okay to lean on them a little bit.
Dan, we'll probably squeeze in one more question here. It comes from Picola Buckeye, who's one of our 12th Warriors. Thank you, Picola Buckeye, for being one of those. He's asking, while Coach Day consistently says that there is much to work on and improve, he also seems genuinely excited about this team and the way that it is playing to date. What do you think it is about this team that is generating this confidence and excitement from Coach Day?
Well, it certainly starts with the defense. I mean, Andy mentioned it before. I mean, you look at what his defense has done, averaging less than 7 points allowed per game. I mean, those would be historically great numbers if Ohio State can sustain that. And so it certainly starts with that. I mean, I think they know they have the best defense in the country. And if you have the best defense in the country, you're always going to have a chance to win games. So it starts there. And then you've got a really good young quarterback, Julian Sayin, who I think is very much in the conversation for being the best quarterback in college football right now. And as Andy said, you've got the best receiver tandem in college football and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. An offensive line that maybe has some room to grow, particularly in the run game, but has been very good in pass protection. I think you've got, 4 spots there. Austin Sierra, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Phillip Daniels. If those guys have really locked down those spots, we've continued to see that rotation at right guard. But I think those other 4 are guys you feel really good about. Certainly a ton of depth at tight end. And so, yeah, I agree with Picola Buckeyes Reed that, you get the sense he's not going to outright say it because it's 6 games into the year and he's going to keep talking about we're getting set up when people talk about how great we are. But you feel like there's a genuine belief between Ryan Day and this staff and this team that they have the team to go win another national championship this year. I think they really believe that, and they know there's a long way to go to get there, and they know that they have to keep getting better if they're going to ultimately get there. But I think, Ryan Day knows now what a national championship team looks like, And I think he feels like if everything comes together the way it did at the end of last season, that he could have a number one.
Yeah, to add to that, I thought that Ryan Day's answer when he was asked about what he's learned about his team this season in the post-game press conference on Saturday was a long answer. It was a great answer. He said that there are guys on this team that he didn't know about that have proven that they belong. He always calls his team competitive and edgy. But he said that they want to be great and expect to be great. They expect to win all the time. He said that he's really been harping on them about growing and maturing, and that you're seeing a pretty mature group despite them being a younger group. Or I guess maybe a group with less experience than the one certainly last season that saw so many guys go to the NFL draft. But it really, I think the message he seems to keep coming back to is one about selfishness and unselfishness. Is this group going to be able to put aside the individual accolades, the individual statistics for the sake of team glory? And he specifically mentioned Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, who have been leaders in that respect, that they, of course, would love to have a game like they had against Minnesota every single week. But if it means an Ohio State win for them to just set the edge on the perimeter and to be running forward on routes to open up other people underneath, then they're going to do it. And they want to perform like they did against Minnesota, but they understand what needs to be done for this team to have a chance to be special. And so it seems like that has been the motivation for Ohio State this season from its players and coaches, is to put aside maybe individual glory for the sake of the team. But that's going to do it for another episode of 11 Warriors Live. Typically, I would ask Andy to give us a brief preview about the Wisconsin team, but we mentioned they lost 37-0 against Iowa this past week. So we will see if the Ohio State can cover a 28.5-point spread against Wisconsin, which was, I believe, the same number that ended Ohio versus Ohio State, was around that number. So we'll see if they beat them better than they beat the Bobcats. It'll be on the road at Camp Randall Stadium. Want to give another shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio, the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. I've been Chase Brown, joined as always by Dan Hope and Andy Anders. We'll talk to you again next week to break down the game Ohio State plays against Wisconsin. Until then, we'll talk to you.